Sermon of the Week, Comfort. Nice hit, the manager yelled to his right fielder, now standing on first base. The few spectators in the stands were quiet, save one older woman who was standing and clapping and cheering. Sit down, the younger man yelled in her direction. It's only a single. She finally sat back down as the leadoff hitter for the Robins, their shortstop, stepped to the plate. He soon sat back on the bench after swinging and missing at 3 fastballs. He and his Robin teammates were headed out to the field. See, that single meant nothing. Your Robins are worthless. Robins is kind of a dumb name anyway. We're the Eagles. Now there's a real bird, strong and proud. But the older woman was about to say Robins were the first bird to show up in the spring, but she thought better of it. It's kind of a pattern she'd always adhered to in life. She had no wealth, but took care of her grandson, the right fielder, who had lost both parents to the war. Now there's a real player. He's an Eagle. He will knock the cover off this ball, the young man said to the young woman seated next to him on the hard wooden bench. I'm tired. When will this game be over? I want to go. Soon, dear, soon. Once my boy hits this home run, it will be all over. Then we can go. I want to go to the bar and do some dancing tonight, and I don't want to wait for this game to be over. I want to go now. It will be over soon. The smile on the man's face soon disappeared as the boy at the plate, who was the young man's son, hit a line drive to deep right field that somehow the right fielder caught. The older woman, the grandmother of the right fielder, stood again and cheered. Give me the keys, the woman next to the young man demanded. Just a few more batters will win this. Just 15 minutes more. The next batter for the Eagles struck out, but the third man up singled and the fourth man doubled him to third base, and were now on second and third with 2 out. The young woman pulled a cigarette from her purse, lit it, and began to puff away. You can't smoke here. See the sign? The young man said. Who's going to stop me? I'll smoke if I want. Maybe it will take my mind off this awful game. The young man stared at her, then back to the field. All he needs is a single and the game will be over, he said to his disgruntled companion. This guy's a good hitter. He'll get the run home, then we'll go dancing. His companion, the young woman, muttered something under her breath, but he heard it. Honey, the kids will hear you. She then made sure all in the stands and those in the dugouts and infield could hear, yelling out the same phrase she had muttered. She stared over at the old woman who was blushing. Honey, the young man said, give me the keys or I'll say it again louder this time. 1 minute, it'll be over. But as he said the words, the Eagles' best hitter took a mighty swing and missed. I was wrong. We go to extra innings. Here are the keys. Tell our friends I'll be late. Have fun. He handed her the keys to his Suburban. She grabbed them and took off for the parking lot. I hate baseball. I hate my boyfriend. I hate my life. Why can't I just have fun? Well, tonight I'm going to have fun. His friend will be at the bar. He's got a wife, but she's nothing compared to me. I'll steal him for the night. He's given me a couple looks before. Then we will have some fun. She climbed in the Suburban's driver's seat, turned on the key, reached in her purse, and pulled out another cigarette. This one was a little different from the first one. She lit it and slammed down the accelerator. The Suburban jerked forward. Fun, that's what I need. That's what everybody needs. Soon the radio was blaring the tune, Fun, Fun, Fun by the Beach Boys. Finally a wide smile came to her beautiful face as she joined the boys in song. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians 3:28. Are you a comfortable person? Do you live a comfortable life? Do you have everything you want or need? Do you live in a nice neighborhood? Do you have a lot of friends? And more importantly, do you like your friends? How about your relatives? Do you like or at least get along with them? How about your workplace? Do you like those you work with? How about your church, if you have one? How about your school? How about, the how abouts go on endlessly. But to many of us, comfort is the most important thing in our life. Often we equate it with happiness, but this is not always the case. The Apostle Paul was like many of us, comfortable in his life. He grew up in a well-to-do home. He lived in a Roman world, but was a Jew by religion. His parents sent him to the best Jewish school in the world, the school of Gamaliel in Jerusalem. He liked it there, so much that he excelled. In fact, upon graduation, he was selected by the Jewish hierarchy of the time to be one of their military leaders. Remember, this same Jewish hierarchy had just put down what they thought to be a rebellion by having the Romans crucify the leader of that rebellion, Jesus of Nazareth, also a Jew. Paul, or Saul as he was called at the time, was born in 4 AD, so 8 years younger than Jesus. Yet he went to the school in Jerusalem when he was about 12 or 16 AD. He says he was a Pharisee, which also took time to become. Paul says he never met the man Jesus, but he certainly knew of him and may have seen him or even been at his crucifixion, as were many Jewish leaders. After Christ's crucifixion, Paul became one of the spearheads of the Jewish army ordered to kill anyone who followed or had any connection to Jesus. So as we see, Paul had a comfortable life. He went to the finest school. He made a good living, was liked by his peers, and selected to be one of their leaders. Yet something was missing. Paul couldn't put his finger on it. He didn't like being with the poor. He tolerated the Romans, as he was one of them also, but he didn't like them. He didn't like anyone who didn't believe as he did, that is, as the Jews did. But something wasn't quite right. Thoughts and questions began to creep into his fertile mind. I'm not sure what actually got to him. Maybe it was all the bloodshed he was causing. Maybe his family was against his terrorist activities even though they were sanctioned. Maybe it was how those he persecuted, including Jesus himself, never fought back. However, I think the Bible gives us a hint of when things begin to turn in Paul's mind. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Acts 6:8. Stephen was chosen to be one of the early Christian church leaders, but the Jewish leaders did not like his activities in miracle making. The priests set up false witnesses and used the same old worn-out accusation of blasphemy against the holy place and the law that they had used against Christ. Stephen was brought to trial at the court, but his opening statement took them by surprise. Stephen waxed eloquent for what seemed forever to them. It fills the chapter of Acts 7. Finally, having heard more about their own evil than they could stand, they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears and ran upon him with one accord and cast him out of the city and stoned him. Acts 7:57 and 58. Reading further in Acts 7:58, it says, "And the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet, whose name was Saul." Moving ahead, and Saul was consenting unto his death. And at that time there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem. Acts 8:1. Moving ahead again. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house and hailing men and women, committed them to prison. But as with Christ's crucifixion, this plan didn't work. Therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. It does not say Paul picked up a stone, but it does say he did nothing to stop the stoning of Stephen. Well, why would he? He was a man of power. He was just overseeing the carrying out of the sentence imposed on Stephen by the court, by his bosses. Yet I believe that even then something began to turn in Paul's mind. Paul was becoming uncomfortable with what he was doing or what his bosses were doing or with what was happening. He and the priestly hierarchy were not suppressing the Christian church. They were causing it to grow exponentially. In effect, they, by their actions, were spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ all over the place. Paul and his cohorts were realizing they couldn't keep up. The prisons were full, and every time he turned around there were a dozen more of the hated Christians to be rounded up. The mysterious workings of our God are so difficult for the human mind to comprehend, yet so simple and so effective. And now our boy Paul was slowly beginning to realize he was on the wrong train. As a child growing up, I was encouraged and sometimes ordered to study my Bible. One thing I learned and never forgot was to list the 66 books of the Bible. I remember when I got to Galatians, Philippians, Ephesians, and Colossians, I wondered what the words meant. With further learning, I found out these were peoples, and I always wondered just who they were, why they were in the Bible at all. Galatians is the 9th book of the New Testament and the 48th book of the Bible, the King James Version. Galatia in Paul's time was an area in what is now the Central Highlands of Turkey, which today includes Ankara, the capital of Turkey. In Paul's time, it was a Roman province. The word Galatia stems from the Gauls who came from Central Europe and settled here in the 3rd century BC. During Paul's first missionary journey, Paul travels through Galatia and wrote his letter to them around 48 BC. Paul begins this letter to the Galatians by giving a summary of his life, which includes a confession. For ye have heard of my conversation in time past in Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God and wasted it. Galatians 1:13. Goes on to say that he was uncomfortable with his life. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen, immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. Galatians 1:15 and 16. Paul, a man uncomfortable with his life, was approached by Christ himself to change, and to everyone's surprise except Christ's, Paul changed. Not to a more comfortable life, but to one of even more discomfort. His next 35 years document all the discomfort, all the trials, all the tribulation, all the hate, and his ultimate death for changing to do God's will. I often wonder what Christ saw in this man. How did he know that Paul was the one he wanted to build his fledgling church into what it has become? How could he realize that this supreme enemy of Christ's newly created little church would not only steer it in the right direction, but expand it into a worldwide church that today encompasses 1/2 of the world's population? I don't know what he saw in Paul, but I wish what he saw in Paul he could see in you and me. I'm sure I don't have it. Maybe you do. Paul gives us one answer in another of his books, 1 Corinthians 13. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. 1 Corinthians 13:13. But as one looks at Saul the persecutor, does one see any of these three characteristics? I don't. I don't think the Bible indicates he had any of them. But in 33 BC, 2 years after Christ's death on the road to Damascus, literally in an instant, Paul acquired all three, and he got on the right train. He went from the Jews' team to Christ's team. Oh, it took him 3 years in Arabia to plan out his new team and assemble it. But that's what he did. He was from then on the right team, the Christian team, and he led them to victory after victory, something he is doing even today. He acquired faith, hope, and charity in an instant. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. Galatians 1:12. Paul tells us how he changed. He met Christ. He knew he was on the wrong team, a team he was uncomfortable with, and he signed on with the right team, a team he was perfectly comfortable with. There is no power like the power of Christ. Paul knew that changing teams would bring him much discomfort. But he was comfortable with that, knowing that Christ would provide all that he needed. And Paul's life is testimony to that fact. He was constantly in peril, Yet Christ provided for him, knowing he was the perfect man for the job. That job was to save humanity from evil. If a preacher comes into your town or church with a resume like Paul's, will you go and listen to him? He is a documented murderer of men, women, and children. He is a Jew, yet he says he is a loyal Roman. In his day, both Romans and Jews were generally a hated lot, and now he wants to come into your town and preach faith, hope, and charity. Are you going to listen? Are you going to even let him in your town? Certainly not. Paul documents this fact. But they had heard only that he which persecuted us in times past now preacheth the faith with which once he destroyed. Galatians 1:23. In fact, you'll probably put this preacher in jail, and this is in fact what happened to Paul. Paul had a tough road to travel. It was never an easy road, yet deep down this man knew he could do it. I'm sure he had misgivings many times, but he knew that one person was always on his side. Christ had promised him that he would always be there for him, and he was. Our road may also be a difficult one, but like Paul, Christ will always be there for us no matter how bad the situation. John 3:16 guarantees it. Christ comes to comfortable you and says that he needs you to be uncomfortable. You need to stare out at your uncomfortable world and do something about it. And he says he will be with you and help you every step of the way. Paul said yes to Christ. History tells us that there are many others who also said yes. Constantine, Charlemagne, Luther, Moore, Livingston, Lincoln, Eisenhower, and so many others realized they were on the wrong train, stopped what they were doing, and got on the right train. They, with Christ's help, made the world a better place, but of course the work is not over. We are now living in the time of the end. Things are winding up for this tired old world, and we all need to get on that right train and encourage everyone we meet to do the same thing. It's often an uncomfortable thing to speak to someone of Jesus Christ and tell them that he is the only way to eternal life and eternal happiness. But that is what all must do. We may be someone's only link to eternity. We must be like Paul and get out of our comfortable life and get into the uncomfortable life. We may not always like it. The people around us may not always like us. But we will always know it is the right train. Each day Paul grew farther away from his old self, Saul, and closer to his new self, Paul, the man Christ wanted him to become. He finally came to this realization of what that meant and penned it in Galatians 5:22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Paul, with these 9 words, defined what it is, what Christ wants us to become. Heaven is often portrayed as a boring place where we all sit around on clouds, strumming a harp or staring into space. People in this world who tend to adhere to Paul's 9 words are often considered boring also. But Paul was not a boring man. He was as dynamic and interesting a person as any that has ever lived. And when you step out of your old self and into your new self in the new earth, 1 Corinthians 15:51, you will never be bored ever again. Take 5 minutes and read Revelation chapters 21 and 22. It just skims the surface of what our new life will be like. It will be filled with comfort, joy, happiness, and yes, unimaginable food. And best of all, it will last forever, a word that human mind has not yet been able to comprehend. Paul says, "Ye have been called unto liberty." Galatians 5:13. Paul says, be there. The young woman drove to the bar and could hear the loud music coming from the open door. She pulled her Suburban into the lot and parked next to an Escalade. She knew the difference between the two SUVs. She also knew that her boyfriend was not nearly as well off as the man who she was determined to meet, wife or no wife. She was a very pretty woman and knew she would have no trouble spiriting him away from his wife. Then maybe she could take over and then she would have all the wealth she needed. No, all the wealth she craved. No, all the wealth she deserved. After all, she was the prettiest girl in town. She was entering the bar. Boyfriend and the old woman were watching the Robins and the Eagles battle into extra innings. Neither team could mount a threat until the 13th, when the Eagles' fourth pitcher got into a spell of wildness after two were out. Made an error allowing the old woman's grandson, the Robins' right fielder, to reach first base. The pitcher then walked the next two batters, loading the bases with two out. The young man, who had forgotten all about his now happier girlfriend, was wringing his hands and yelling at the pitcher, the coach, the ump, and the old woman. He knew his Eagles team had to win. The Robins' next batter stepped to the plate and came to the set position. He began to wind up, and the pitcher began to wind up, and inexplicably the old woman's grandson, the one on third base, took off for home. The pitch was a fastball right down the middle. The batter, seeing the runner heading for him, stepped back, and the old woman's son slid. His foot touched home plate just as the catcher made a swipe tag. The ump stared at the play, and after about 15 seconds crossed both hands and yelled, "Safe!" The young man ran out to home plate and got into the umpire's face, yelling many unprintable words. The Eagles' coach and teammates did the same, but their anger and inexcusable actions went for naught. The umpire would not change his mind. The Robins' next batter struck out, but the Robins now had a one-run lead going into the bottom of the 13th inning. The old woman was overjoyed, but unfortunately the Robins' fourth pitcher found the same zone of wildness that the Eagles' pitcher had in the top of the inning. An error and two walks loaded the bases again, but the Eagles' coaches cautioned all the runners not to try and steal. The young man's son was now up with the Eagles down a run, but with the bases loaded. A single would surely tie and probably win this game. He was a good left-handed hitter. The count reached 3-2. The Robins pitcher wound up, released his best fastball. It was a little bit inside, but the young man's son turned on it and launched a deep drive to right field. The woman's grandson saw it and turned and ran back toward the low chain-link outfield fence. He and the baseball got there at the same time, both at full speed. The right fielder reached up and somehow got his glove on the ball, but slammed into the fence and tumbled to the ground. The ball was jarred loose, but before it fell to the ground, it fell into the right fielder's glove as he lay spread eagle on the ground. The Eagles players began running around the bases and jumping in the air, but all went dead silent as the ump raised his arm with the thumb extended. "You're out. Game over." He began to walk off the field, but was immediately accosted by the Eagles coach, the players, and the young man. "The ball hit the wall before he caught it. Didn't you see it? Are you blind? You are blind," the coach said to the umpire. All were livid and actually began pushing the umpire. But he was a big man, and he just kept on walking. The young man threatened to kill him, then thought better of it and threatened to sue him, but of course that never happened. The old woman began cheering as never before, but surprisingly the Robins players did not. They just began packing up their gear and headed to their cars. One was heard to say, "Why does that kid have to win the game and be the hero? He's our worst player. Why couldn't I or one of our good players win the game for us? I hope he's not on the team next year." The right fielder, who had made the game-saving catch, legal or illegal, still lay on the ground with the ball in his glove. The old woman ran out to see if he was okay. It was a hot day, but she finally got to her grandson laying in the dirt under the 300-foot sign. "Honey, that was the greatest catch ever." "Thanks, Grandma," he said weakly. "You okay?" she said. "I think I broke my leg," he said, pointing to his right ankle. "Oh, no, let me see," she said, touching it. He yelped, and she pulled back, but the widest smile in all the universe came to his face. But I don't care. We won the game.